The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets of Redemption Creek. But Grace Reynolds barely flinched as she hurried down the muddy thoroughfare toward the Gilded Horseshoe Saloon, clutching her worn shawl tightly around her shoulders against the early morning chill of the Colorado Territory in 1876. The frontier town of Redemption Creek had not been kind to Grace since her arrival 3 months ago. At 22, she had journeyed west from Philadelphia following her father's death, hoping to claim the small plot of land he had purchased years before. Instead, she found the deed contested by the powerful Blackwell Mining Company, her meager savings dwindling with each passing day, and the cruel reality of being a woman alone in the untamed West settling around her like dust. The Gilded Horseshoe rose before her, its weathered facade a stark contrast to the gaudy gold-painted signs swinging above the batwing doors. Grace took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had never imagined setting foot in such an establishment, but desperation had a way of reshaping one's principles. With less than $2 to her name and the boarding house threatening eviction, this job cleaning the saloon before it opened each day was her last hope. "You must be the new girl," a woman called as Grace entered, the smell of stale whiskey and tobacco smoke assaulting her senses. Vivian Hart, the saloon's madam and part owner, stood behind the long bar, her red hair elaborately styled despite the early hour. Though approaching 40, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had survived in a world designed to break her. "Yes, madam, Grace Reynolds." She tried to keep her voice steady. Vivian looked her up and down, eyes narrowing. "Pretty thing like you could make more money upstairs with my girls." Grace felt her cheeks flush. "I'm just here to clean, Mrs. Hart." A knowing smile crossed Vivian's painted lips. "Suit yourself. Mops in the back along with the rest of the supplies. I want this place spotless before noon." Tables scrubbed, spittoons emptied, floors mopped. 25 cents a day, paid at the end of each week. It wasn't much, but it would keep a roof over her head and food in her stomach barely. Grace nodded her agreement and set to work. For 3 weeks, she arrived each morning before dawn, scrubbing and scouring until her hands were raw. She learned to tune out Vivian's occasional suggestions that she consider more profitable employment, focusing instead on her goal, saving enough to hire a lawyer who might help her reclaim her father's land. She never stayed past noon, avoiding the saloon's regular patrons and the increasingly rowdy atmosphere that accompanied the recent silver strike in the nearby hills. Redemption Creek was growing more dangerous by the day as prospectors, gamblers, and outlaws flooded into town, all chasing fortune or fleeing their pasts. On a crisp October morning, Grace arrived to find Vivian in a state of unusual agitation. "We've got important guests coming tonight," the madam announced, arranging bottles behind the bar. "Colton Jameson and his crew. They're staying in town for a few days." The name meant nothing to Grace. "Should I clean something differently?" Vivian laughed. "Honey, you should learn who matters in these parts. Jameson owns the largest cattle ranch in the territory. Half the men in these parts either work for him or wish they did." Grace merely nodded and went about her work. The rich and powerful held no interest for her. They were usually the source of ordinary people's troubles. That evening, against her better judgment, Grace returned to the Gilded Horseshoe. Her landlady had informed her that morning that the rent was increasing, and she needed to understand just how much more she would need to earn. Perhaps Vivian would allow her to work additional hours serving drinks, though the thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety. The saloon was crowded, thick with smoke and the sounds of a player piano. Grace slipped in through the back entrance, hoping to find Vivian without drawing attention. She wore her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother, but still felt painfully out of place among the painted women circulating through the room. She spotted Vivian near the bar and began making her way through the crowd, careful to avoid the more boisterous patrons. As she navigated between tables, a drunken miner grabbed her arm. "Ain't seen you before, pretty thing. How much for your company?" "Let go of me," Grace said firmly, trying to pull away without causing a scene. The man's grip tightened. "Come now, don't be unfriendly." "The lady asked you to let go." The voice was deep and steady, carrying a quiet authority that seemed to cut through the saloon's noise. Both Grace and the miner turned toward the source. A tall man stood from his seat at table 5, located in the corner of the room. His face was partially shadowed beneath the brim of a black Stetson, but Grace could make out a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of beard. He wore a dark coat over a simple shirt, with none of the flamboyance of the gamblers or the roughness of the miners. "This ain't your concern, Jameson," the miner muttered, but his hand dropped from Grace's arm nonetheless. "Colton Jameson." The cattle baron Vivian had mentioned. Up close, Grace could see he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with intelligent blue eyes that assessed the situation calmly. "Apologize to the lady," Jameson said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. The miner mumbled something that barely passed for an apology before shuffling away toward the bar. Grace turned to her unexpected defender. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson, but I could have handled it." A slight smile crossed his face. "I don't doubt it, Miss Reynolds, Grace Reynolds." "Miss Reynolds." He tipped his hat slightly. "I haven't seen you here before. I clean the saloon in the mornings. I'm not." She felt her cheeks flush. "I'm not one of Mrs. Hart's girls." Understanding crossed his features. "I see. Then may I ask what brings you here tonight?" Before Grace could answer, Vivian appeared at her side, a look of displeasure poorly concealed on her face. "Grace, I didn't expect to see you this evening." Her tone was pleasant enough, but Grace caught the warning in it. "I wanted to speak with you about additional work, Mrs. Hart," Grace explained quietly. Vivian's gaze flickered between Grace and Jameson. "We'll discuss it tomorrow. For now, why don't you help Jenny serve drinks, since you're here anyway?" It wasn't what Grace had planned, but she nodded her agreement. As she turned to leave, she felt Jameson's eyes follow her. "Miss Reynolds," he called, "when you have a moment, I'd appreciate it if you'd bring a coffee to table 5. 3 hours later, Grace's feet ached from navigating the crowded saloon. She had delivered Jameson's coffee and several subsequent drinks to his table, where he sat playing cards with 3 other men. Unlike many of the patrons, he remained sober and polite, thanking her each time she approached. Near midnight, as the crowd began to thin, Grace delivered another coffee to table 5. Jameson's companions had departed, and he sat alone, organizing a stack of papers. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Jameson?" she asked, eager to finish her unexpected shift. He looked up, studying her face for a moment. "Actually, yes. Please sit down for a moment if you don't mind." Grace hesitated. "I'm supposed to be working." "I'll speak with Mrs. Hart if necessary." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Reluctantly, Grace sat, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. "You're not from around here," Jameson observed. "No, Philadelphia originally." "A long way from home." He took a sip of his coffee. "What brings a proper Eastern lady to Redemption Creek?" Under normal circumstances, Grace would have politely deflected such personal questions, but something in his direct gaze made her answer honestly. "My father died last year. He had purchased a plot of land here years ago when the territory was first opened for settlement. I came to claim it, only to find that Blackwell Mining Company has contested the deed." The bitterness she tried to keep contained slipped into her voice. They claim my father's purchase was never properly recorded. Interest sharpened in Jameson's eyes. Where is this land located? North of town, along Cottonwood Creek. He nodded slowly. Valuable property, especially now with the silver strike. The water rights alone would be worth fighting for. He studied her for a moment. And you're here alone. No husband, family, no one, Grace confirmed. I'm saving to hire a lawyer, but… She gestured around the saloon. It's slow progress. Jameson was quiet for a moment, appearing to consider something. Finally, he spoke. I might be able to help you, Miss Reynolds. Grace's guard immediately rose. She had received enough offers from men to recognize one coming. That's very kind, Mr. Jameson, but not that kind of help, he interrupted, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I'm in need of a tutor for my younger sister. She's 16 and woefully undereducated after growing up on the ranch. I've recently built a proper house, and I intend for her to eventually attend school back east. She needs preparation. Grace blinked in surprise. I don't understand. I'm offering you employment, Miss Reynolds. Room and board at my ranch, plus a generous salary, in exchange for educating my sister. Given your speech and manners, I assume you're well educated yourself. Yes, I attended the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania for a year before my father fell ill. It had been her greatest disappointment, abandoning her studies to care for him. Jameson looked genuinely impressed. Perfect. The position is yours if you want it. It would certainly allow you to save money more quickly then. He glanced around the saloon. The offer was unexpected and almost too good to be true. Grace had learned to be cautious of seemingly easy solutions, especially when they came from powerful men. Why would you help me, Mr. Jameson? You don't know me. He considered her question seriously. Let's say I recognize someone fighting against unfair odds, and I have no love for the Blackwell Mining Company. They've been trying to encroach on ranchers' water rights throughout the territory. Before Grace could respond, a commotion erupted near the bar. Two miners were shoving each other, their voices raised in anger. Within seconds, punches were thrown and the fight began spreading as others joined in. Jameson stood quickly. We should continue this conversation elsewhere. This could get ugly. As if to punctuate his words, a bottle shattered against the wall nearby. Vivian was shouting for her bouncer as chairs toppled and men lunged at each other. Jameson took Grace's elbow and guided her toward the back door, navigating through the chaos with practiced ease. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet compared to the brawl inside. Consider my offer, Miss Reynolds, Jameson said, releasing her arm once they were safely outside. I'll be in town for 2 more days staying at the Western Hotel. If you're interested, come see me tomorrow. With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Grace standing in the alley behind the saloon, her mind whirling with possibilities. That night, Grace barely slept. Jameson's offer represented everything she needed: better pay, safe housing, and legitimate work that wouldn't slowly chip away at her dignity. Yet caution kept her from embracing it immediately. She had heard too many stories of women lured into compromising situations by seemingly respectable men. As dawn broke, she made her decision. She would meet with Jameson again, ask more questions, and perhaps seek references from others in town who might know him. If everything seemed legitimate, she would accept his offer. She arrived at the saloon early as usual, finding it in worse disarray than normal after the previous night's brawl. As she swept up broken glass and righted overturned furniture, Vivian emerged from upstairs, looking tired and irritated. I saw you talking to Jameson last night, the madam said without preamble. What did he want? Grace considered deflecting but decided honesty might yield more information. He offered me a position as a tutor for his sister. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Did he now? And you're considering it. Do you know anything about him that would suggest I shouldn't? The older woman sighed, leaning against the bar. Colton Jameson is probably the most honest man in 3 territories. His father built that ranch from nothing, and Colton doubled its size after the old man died. Treats his workers fair, pays his debts, doesn't cause trouble. She paused. Also hasn't shown interest in a woman since his fiancée died 5 years back. Grace hadn't expected such a direct endorsement. His fiancée, typhoid, hit the settlement hard that year. Vivian shrugged. If he's offering you legitimate work, take it. You don't belong in a place like this, Grace. It was the first time Vivian had used her given name, and Grace was touched by the unexpected concern. Thank you, Mrs. Hart. The madam waved dismissively. Just finish cleaning up this mess before you go, and if the tutor thing doesn't work out, my offer still stands. You'd make a fortune upstairs. Grace smiled despite herself. I'll keep that in mind. After finishing her work at the saloon, Grace returned to her boarding house to change into her best dress before heading to the Western Hotel. The 2-story building was the finest in Redemption Creek, which wasn't saying much, but it was clean and well-maintained. She asked the clerk to announce her to Mr. Jameson and was directed to a small private dining room off the main restaurant. Jameson stood when she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat at the table where coffee and sandwiches had been arranged. Miss Reynolds, I'm glad you came. I haven't made my decision yet, Mr. Jameson, she said, remaining standing. I have questions first, he nodded, seeming to approve of her caution. Of course, please ask anything you wish. Tell me more about your sister and what her education has been like so far. Jameson's expression softened at the mention of his sister. Emma lost our mother when she was just 2. Our father did his best, but a cattle ranch is no place for proper feminine education. I've taught her to read and do basic arithmetic, and she's bright, but she lacks knowledge of history, literature, science, and all the social graces a young lady should possess. And why me? Surely there are qualified teachers in Denver or Colorado Springs. I've tried hiring teachers before. They rarely last more than a few months. The isolation of ranch life doesn't suit most people accustomed to city comforts. He paused. You, however, have demonstrated remarkable determination by coming west alone and persevering despite difficult circumstances. That suggests you might have the character needed for frontier life. His assessment was surprisingly perceptive, which both impressed and unsettled Grace. You said you've built a new house, Jameson nodded. The main ranch house was completed last year. It's a proper home, not the cabin my father built. You would have your own private bedroom and sitting room. Emma has a separate wing. My quarters are downstairs, and I'm often away dealing with ranch business. He seemed to understand her unspoken concern about propriety, addressing it directly. Mrs. Abernathy serves as housekeeper and would act as chaperone. Her husband is my foreman. They've been with my family for 20 years. Grace took a seat finally, considering his words. And the salary, $40 a month plus room and board. A 3-month trial period, after which we can renegotiate if things are working well. It was an extremely generous offer, more than 4 times what she could hope to make at the saloon. With that kind of salary, she could save enough to hire a good lawyer within months, not years. When would you expect me to start? We ride out tomorrow morning if that suits you. I have business in Denver next week, so this timing works well. He studied her face. Does this mean you're accepting the position? Grace took a deep breath. Every instinct told her this was the right decision, despite the risk of leaving town with a man she barely knew. Yes, Mr. Jameson. I accept. The journey to Jameson Ranch took nearly 2 days, traveling north and west from Redemption Creek into increasingly remote territory. Grace rode a gentle mare provided by Jameson, while he led the way on a powerful black stallion. 2 ranch hands accompanied them, managing the pack horses carrying supplies from town. The men were respectful, keeping a proper distance that suggested Jameson had instructed them on how to behave around her. Their slow pace accommodated Grace's limited riding experience, and they stopped frequently to rest. Despite this consideration, by the time they crested a ridge overlooking a vast valley on the afternoon of the second day, every muscle in Grace's body ached from the unaccustomed activity. "Jameson Ranch," Colton announced, gesturing to the sprawling property below. Grace caught her breath. The valley was beautiful, bisected by a winding river lined with cottonwood trees. Herds of cattle dotted the grasslands, and in the distance, she could see buildings clustered near a bend in the river. The main house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and multiple chimneys. "It's magnificent," she said honestly. A look of pride crossed his face. "My father claimed this land when there was nothing but wilderness and hostile tribes for 100 miles. Took him 20 years to build it into something lasting." He turned to her. "Another hour's ride and you can rest properly." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Several workers paused in their tasks to watch as Jameson helped Grace dismount in front of the main house. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and she grasped his arm for support. "First long ride?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Is it that obvious?" She managed a smile despite her discomfort. "You did well for a city woman." He offered his arm. "Come inside. Mrs. Abernathy will have dinner ready and you can meet Emma." The interior of the house surprised Grace. While the exterior was purely functional, inside she found comfortable furniture, colorful rugs, and bookshelves filled with volumes she wouldn't have expected to find so far from civilization. It was a home that reflected both frontier practicality and Eastern refinement. A plump woman with gray-streaked hair emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mr. Jameson, welcome back." Her gaze shifted to Grace with open curiosity. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Grace Reynolds, Emma's new tutor. Miss Reynolds, this is Mrs. Abernathy, the finest housekeeper in the Colorado Territory." The older woman smiled warmly. "Welcome, Miss Reynolds. We're so pleased you've come." Emma's been beside herself with excitement since receiving Mr. Jameson's telegram. As if summoned by her name, a young girl appeared at the top of the staircase. Emma Jameson was tall for 16, with the same blue eyes as her brother, though her hair was lighter, falling in loose waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple dress that had clearly seen better days, and her eager expression reminded Grace of a colt all energy and awkward enthusiasm. "Colt," she called, rushing down the stairs with none of the decorum expected of a young lady. She threw her arms around her brother, who returned her embrace with obvious affection. "Emma, mind your manners," he chided gently. "This is Miss Reynolds, your new tutor." Emma turned to Grace with undisguised curiosity. "You're prettier than the last one." She had a face like a sour pickle and kept rapping my knuckles with a ruler. "Emma," Jameson looked mortified, but Grace couldn't help laughing. "I promise not to use rulers as weapons, Miss Jameson, though I will expect your full attention during lessons." Emma grinned. "I like her, Colt, Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat. "Dinner is ready whenever you are, Mr. Jameson. I've prepared Miss Reynolds's room and had hot water brought up for washing." "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. We'll eat in 30 minutes. Emma, show Miss Reynolds to her quarters and help her get settled." Emma practically bounced with excitement as she led Grace upstairs to the east wing of the house. The room was larger than any Grace had occupied since leaving Philadelphia, with a comfortable-looking bed, a writing desk near the window, and a small adjoining sitting room. "My room is just down the hall," Emma explained, pointing. "Colt's rooms are downstairs. He says it's to give us privacy, but really it's because he sometimes comes in late and doesn't want to wake us." She sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Grace examined her new accommodations. "Where are you from? Do you have family? How did Colt find you? The last tutor came from Boston and hated everything about ranch life." Grace smiled at the barrage of questions. "I'm from Philadelphia. My parents have both passed away." "And your brother found me working in a saloon in Redemption Creek." Emma's eyes widened. "A saloon? Were you one of those dancing girls? Colt never lets me go into town when we pass a saloon." "No, I was just cleaning," Grace clarified quickly. "And your brother is right to keep you away from such places." The girl looked disappointed at the mundane explanation. "Well, I'm glad you're here anyway. It gets lonely with just Colt and the ranch hands. And Colt says I need to be a proper lady if I'm going to school in the East someday." "Do you want to go east?" Emma shrugged. "I want to see more of the world than just this ranch, but I'd miss Colt and the horses." She stood suddenly. "I should let you wash up before dinner. There's water in the pitcher and towels in the cabinet. I'll come fetch you when it's time to eat." After Emma left, Grace sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's journey and the sudden change in her circumstances. Just yesterday, she had been scrubbing floors in a saloon with no clear path forward. Now she was established in a comfortable home with meaningful work and the means to save for her future. And then there was Colton Jameson himself. She had to admit there was something compelling about the rancher, his quiet confidence, his obvious love for his sister, the intelligent way he observed the world around him. He was unlike any man she had met before, in the East or the West. She pushed the thought aside. He was her employer, nothing more, and she would be wise to remember that. The next morning, Grace awoke to sunlight streaming through her window and the distant sound of cattle lowing. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous days came rushing back, and she sat up, taking in her new surroundings in the clear light of day. After dressing in one of her 2 serviceable dresses, she made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen. "Good morning, Miss Reynolds." "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. Is there anything I can help with?" The housekeeper shook her head. "Not today. You get settled first. Mr. Jameson is out with the men already. They're moving cattle to the north pasture, but he left this for you." She handed Grace an envelope. Inside was a brief note in a firm, clear hand. "Miss Reynolds, feel free to use today to rest and become acquainted with the house. The study contains books you may find useful for Emma's education. We will discuss a formal curriculum tomorrow evening. Respectfully, C." Jameson. There was also a small key, which Mrs. Abernathy explained opened the glass-fronted bookcase in the study. "He keeps the more valuable books locked away. Not that Emma would damage them, but some are quite old and precious to him." After breakfast, Grace explored the house, eventually finding Emma in the stables helping one of the ranch hands groom the horses. "Miss Reynolds," the girl called cheerfully, "do you ride? I could show you around the property." "Perhaps another day," Grace said. "Today I thought we might talk about your education so far. What subjects have you studied?" Emma's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Must we start lessons already? I thought we'd have at least a few days of freedom." "Not formal lessons," Grace assured her. "Just a conversation to help me understand what you already know and what you enjoy learning." This seemed to satisfy the girl, and they spent the morning walking the grounds near the house while Emma described her sporadic education. As Grace had suspected, Emma was intelligent but poorly served by inconsistent teaching. She read well and had a natural aptitude for mathematics, but her knowledge of history, geography, and science was haphazard at best. And what about music, art, languages? Grace asked as they sat in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Emma made a face. The last tutor tried to teach me piano, but I have no talent for it. And I can draw horses quite well, but Miss Pemberley said my still lifes looked like someone had thrown the fruit at the paper rather than arranged it. Grace laughed. Perhaps we can focus on your strengths and interests. Not every young lady needs to excel at the same things. Emma studied her with newfound respect. You're different from the others. They all wanted to turn me into something I'm not. I want to give you the knowledge and skills you'll need for whatever future you choose, Grace explained. Whether that's back east at school or here on the ranch or somewhere else entirely. Colt chose well this time, Emma said decisively. Later that afternoon, Grace explored the study, examining the books behind the glass doors. Jameson's collection was impressive classics of literature, history volumes, scientific texts, and even several medical books that caught her particular interest. Using the key, she unlocked the cabinet and carefully removed a beautifully bound anatomy text she recognized from her brief time at medical college. She was so absorbed in the detailed illustrations that she didn't hear footsteps approaching until a voice spoke from the doorway. I see you found my father's medical library. Grace started, nearly dropping the book. Colton Jameson stood watching her, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry, she said, quickly returning the book to its shelf. No need to apologize. That's why I gave you the key. He entered the room, removing his hat and gloves. Though he had clearly been working, he appeared less disheveled than one might expect. My father wanted to be a doctor before circumstances led him west. He collected medical texts his entire life. They're remarkable. Some of these are quite advanced. She hesitated. I studied medicine briefly before my father's illness forced me to abandon my education. Interest sparked in his eyes. A female doctor, that's unusual. I never completed my training, Grace admitted. But yes, the Women's Medical College was established specifically to train female physicians. Impressive, and unfortunate that you couldn't continue. He seemed genuinely regretful on her behalf. Please feel free to read any of the books. My father would have liked knowing they were being appreciated by someone who understands their value. Thank you. She watched as he moved to the desk, sorting through some papers there. How was your day with the cattle? Productive. We're preparing for winter, moving the herds to more sheltered grazing land. He glanced up. And yours? How do you find Emma? Bright, curious, and in desperate need of consistent education, but she has natural intelligence and a good heart. A smile softened his features. She likes you already. That's half the battle won. She mentioned previous tutors. 3 in the past 2 years. None lasted more than a few months. They found ranch life too isolated or Emma too spirited. He sighed. I want her to have opportunities I didn't. Our father was a good man, but education wasn't his priority. There was something touching about his devotion to his sister's future. We'll develop a structured curriculum tomorrow, with your approval, of course. I trust your judgment, Miss Reynolds. He gathered the papers from the desk. I have some business to attend to before dinner. Please, continue exploring the library. After he left, Grace found herself reflecting on their conversation. There was a depth to Colton Jameson that intrigued her, the rough-hewn cattle rancher who collected medical texts and spoke with the educated cadence of a man who had read extensively. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace established a routine with Emma. Mornings were devoted to academic subjects: mathematics, literature, history, and science. Afternoons included more practical matters such as correspondence, household management, and the social graces Emma would need if she attended school in the East. To Grace's surprise, Emma proved to be an eager student when subjects were presented in relation to her interests. History lessons incorporated tales of frontier settlement. Science focused on animal husbandry and plant life relevant to ranching. Literature selections often featured strong female characters facing adversity. Colton observed their progress with evident satisfaction, occasionally joining them for afternoon sessions when ranch work permitted. Grace noticed he particularly enjoyed their discussions of literature, sometimes offering insights that revealed his own considerable reading. One evening after Emma had gone to bed, Grace was working at the desk in the study, preparing the next day's lessons. Colton entered with 2 cups of coffee, offering one to her. "You've accomplished more in 2 weeks than the previous tutors did in months," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Emma makes it easy. She wants to learn. She just needs the material presented in ways that engage her. You understand her." He sipped his coffee, studying Grace over the rim of his cup. "Tell me more about your land dispute. You mentioned Blackwell Mining contesting your father's deed." The abrupt change of subject caught Grace off guard. "Yes, my father purchased the land 15 years ago but never settled it himself. When I arrived with his deed, Blackwell's lawyers claimed the transaction had never been properly recorded with the Territorial Land Office." "Was it?" "I believe so, but the records from that period are chaotic at best. The original land office burned down in '67, and many documents were lost." She sighed. "Without more legal help than I can afford, my chances of prevailing against a company like Blackwell are slim." Colton nodded thoughtfully. "I'm riding to Denver next week on business. I know several good attorneys there. Would you allow me to consult with one on your behalf?" "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. Blackwell has been trying to expand into ranching territory for years. Many of us have an interest in seeing them checked." His expression grew serious. "Would you trust me with your father's deed? An attorney would need to examine it." Grace hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I brought it with me. It's the only thing of value I own." "I'll guard it with my life," he promised, his voice solemn. The next morning, Grace gave Colton her father's deed, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the brief contact. "I'll return in 5 days," he told her. "Mrs. Abernathy and the foreman will see to anything you need." "We'll be fine," Grace assured him. "Emma and I have plenty to keep us occupied." He nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say something more. Instead, he simply touched the brim of his hat and mounted his horse, leading a small group of ranch hands toward Denver. With Colton away, the house felt quieter, yet somehow emptier despite his typically reserved presence. Grace threw herself into Emma's lessons, adding longer riding sessions in the afternoons after discovering the girl's passion for teaching horsemanship. "You're a natural," Emma declared as Grace successfully guided her mare over a small jump they had constructed. "Most Eastern ladies I've met can barely stay in the saddle." "I had riding lessons as a child," Grace admitted, "though nothing like this. In Philadelphia, ladies ride side saddle in parks, not astride across open country." Emma grinned. "Which do you prefer?" "This," Grace answered honestly. "There's something freeing about it." That's what Colt always says about ranch life, that even with all the hard work, there's a freedom you can't find in cities. Grace nodded, understanding the sentiment better now than when she'd first arrived. "Your brother is a wise man." "He likes you, you know," Emma said casually, adjusting her stirrups. Grace felt her cheeks warm. "He appreciates my work with you, I'm sure." Emma rolled her eyes. "Not like that. I mean, he likes you, I can tell. He watches you when you're not looking, and he actually talks at dinner now. Before, he'd just eat and go back to work." "Emma, that's hardly appropriate speculation," Grace chided gently. "It's not speculation, it's observation." The girl's expression grew more serious. "He's been alone too long, ever since Alice died. Alice, his fiancée, she got sick 5 years ago. Typhoid. Half the county was ill, but she was one of the few who died." Emma's voice softened. "He was different after that, quieter, focused only on the ranch and taking care of me." Grace didn't know how to respond. The information explained much about Colton's reserved nature, but it also made her uncomfortable. She had no business developing feelings for her employer, especially one still carrying grief for a lost love. "We should head back," she said finally. "There's a storm coming." Indeed, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising the first significant rainfall since Grace's arrival at the ranch. By the time they reached the stables, fat raindrops were beginning to fall. They quickly unsaddled the horses and ran for the main house, arriving just as the downpour began in earnest. Mrs. Abernathy met them at the door with towels. "Just in time. This looks to be a big one." Throughout the evening, the storm intensified. Wind howled around the house, rain lashed against the windows, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the darkness, followed by booming thunder that made the very walls seem to shake. Grace was reading in her room when a particularly violent thunderclap shook the house. Moments later, a soft knock came at her door. "Miss Reynolds." Emma's voice was barely audible above the storm. "Are you awake?" Grace opened the door to find Emma standing there in her nightgown, looking younger than her 16 years. "I was wondering if you might want company," the girl said, clearly trying to maintain her dignity while seeking comfort. "The storm is quite loud on your side of the house." Understanding immediately, Grace smiled. "I would appreciate that. I was just thinking how much louder storms seem out here than in the city." Relief crossed Emma's face as she entered the room. They sat together on Grace's bed, talking about inconsequential things as the storm raged outside. Eventually, Emma fell asleep, and Grace carefully covered her with a blanket before settling into the chair by the window with her book. She watched the storm sweep across the valley, marveling at its raw power. In Philadelphia, nature had seemed a distant thing, controlled and contained by city streets and buildings. Here, it was an ever-present force, beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to ignore, like her growing feelings for Colton Jameson. The thought came unbidden, startling in its clarity. She had been trying to ignore the attraction developing between them, or at least, her attraction to him. Every conversation, every shared glance over dinner, every time she caught him watching her with those thoughtful blue eyes only strengthened the connection she felt. But it was impossible. She was his employee, dependent on his goodwill. Her stay at the ranch was temporary, a means to an end, not a new beginning. Once she secured her land, she would need to make her own way, and yet, lightning flashed again, illuminating the rain-swept landscape. In that brief moment of clarity, Grace admitted to herself that Colton Jameson had come to represent something she hadn't expected to find in the West: possibility. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day, turning the ranch yard into a sea of mud and making outdoor work nearly impossible. By the second day, the rain had stopped, but the damage was evident. Fences had been knocked down by wind, the creek had overflowed its banks, and according to the ranch hands, several cattle had been lost. "Mr. Jameson won't be able to make it back tomorrow as planned," Mrs. Abernathy informed Grace over breakfast. "The creek crossing will be flooded for days. He'll have to take the long way around through Miller's Pass." "How much longer will that take?" Grace asked, trying not to reveal her disappointment. 3 days at least, assuming the pass is clear. Thomas rode out this morning to check the damage and send word to Denver. She patted Grace's hand. "Don't worry, dear. Mr. Jameson has weathered worse storms than this." 3 more days stretched to 5 as reports came back of widespread flooding and damaged bridges. Emma grew increasingly anxious about her brother's safety, and Grace found herself checking the horizon more often than she cared to admit. Finally, nearly 2 weeks after his departure, a rider appeared in the distance. Grace was working with Emma in the parlor when one of the ranch hands burst in. "Miss Emma, the boss is coming." Emma dropped her book and ran to the window. "It's Colt, and there are others with him." Indeed, as Grace joined her at the window, she could see a group of riders approaching Colton at the lead, followed by several men she didn't recognize. Who would he bring back with him? Emma wondered aloud. "We should prepare for guests," Grace suggested, her heart beating faster at the sight of Colton's tall figure. "Emma, please inform Mrs. Abernathy." By the time the riders reached the house, Mrs. Abernathy had arranged refreshments in the parlor, and Emma was practically bouncing with excitement. Grace remained more composed, though the anticipation knotting her stomach belied her outward calm. Colton entered first, his face lighting with a rare, full smile at the sight of Emma running to greet him. He embraced his sister tightly before his gaze found Grace standing by the fireplace. "Miss Reynolds, the house is still standing, so I assume all went well in my absence." "Apart from the storm, everything has been quiet," she assured him, fighting the urge to step closer. He nodded, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary before turning to introduce the men who had followed him inside. "This is Judge William Parker from the Territorial Court and Mr. Henry Wilson, an attorney from Denver." Both men bowed slightly. "And this," Colton continued, gesturing to an older gentleman with a distinguished bearing, "is Mr. George Reynolds." Grace froze, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry." The older man stepped forward, his eyes the same hazel as her own filling with tears. "Grace, is it really you? Uncle George?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "How is this possible?" "I've been searching for you since your father died," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "When your letters stopped coming, I feared the worst." Grace turned to Colton, who was watching the reunion with evident satisfaction. "You found him. Your father's deed had his brother listed as witness to the purchase," Colton explained. "When I showed it to Mr. Wilson, he recognized the name from inquiries made at his firm over the past year. Your uncle has been trying to locate you since receiving news of your father's death." Grace was overwhelmed. Her father's younger brother had moved west years before, and contact had been sporadic. She had written to him after her father's death, but received no reply, assuming her letters had been lost. "But why bring a judge?" she asked, still trying to process the unexpected reunion. Judge Parker cleared his throat. "Mr. Jameson has presented evidence of fraudulent practices by the Blackwell Mining Company. They've been falsifying land records throughout the territory. Your father's deed is one of many legitimate claims they've attempted to invalidate. With your permission, Mr. Wilson added, we're prepared to file a formal complaint and seek immediate restoration of your property rights. The territorial governor has taken a personal interest in the case, given the scope of Blackwell's deception." Grace looked from the lawyer to her uncle to Colton, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us help," Colton suggested quietly. "The fight against Blackwell affects many in the territory. Your case could be the key to stopping them." She nodded, emotion making speech difficult. Her uncle stepped forward to embrace her, and she found herself crying for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, not tears of sorrow or frustration, but of relief and newfound hope. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Judge Parker and Mr. Wilson worked from Colton's study, taking depositions from Grace and preparing legal documents. Her uncle George, now a successful merchant in Denver, filled her in on the years they had been apart and insisted she would never again face such struggles alone. "I would have come sooner had I known your situation," he said over dinner their second evening. "Your father was too proud to admit his financial troubles, even to me." "I inherited that pride," Grace admitted. "I should have tried harder to find you when I first arrived in Colorado. What matters is that we're reunited now." He glanced at Colton, seated at the head of the table. Thanks to Mr. Jameson's remarkable persistence. Colton dismissed the praise with a modest nod. "I merely connected the pieces that were already there." Later that evening, after the others had retired, Grace found Colton alone on the porch, smoking a cigar as he gazed out at the starlit valley. "May I join you?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. He immediately stood, offering her his chair. "Please." "I wanted to thank you properly," she said as they both sat. "What you've done for me goes far beyond employer to employee." In the dim light of the porch lantern, his expression was difficult to read. "Is that how you see our relationship? Merely employer and employee?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. "I don't know what to call it," Grace admitted. "When I came here, I had a clear plan: earn enough money to fight for my land, then build a life there. But now—" "Now," he prompted when she fell silent. "Now everything has changed. I have my uncle, the prospect of regaining my land without years of legal battles, and—" she hesitated. "And I've found myself caring for people I never expected to meet. Emma has grown very attached to you," he said carefully, "and I to her." Grace gathered her courage. "But it's not only Emma." Colton's eyes searched her face. "Grace." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "I know it's inappropriate," she continued quickly. "You're my employer and I'm in your debt, and there are 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't say this, but I've been fighting my feelings for you since the day we met," he interrupted, his voice low and intense. "At first, I told myself it was just admiration for your courage and determination. Then I convinced myself it was merely concern for your welfare. But when I was in Denver, unable to return because of the storm, all I could think about was getting back to you." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you saying, Colton?" "I'm saying that if you still intend to leave once your land matter is settled, I'll respect your decision. But I hope you'll consider staying not as Emma's tutor or as a woman in my debt, but as someone who might, in time, come to see this ranch as her home." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Someone who might come to care for me as I've come to care for her." Grace looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. "I've never met anyone like you, in Philadelphia or here in the West. You're honorable and kind and far more complex than you first appear." A smile touched his lips. "Is that a compliment?" "It is," she returned his smile. "And yes, I've come to care for you too, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Relief and joy transformed his features. For a moment they simply sat there, hands linked, each absorbing the other's confession. Then, slowly, Colton stood, drawing Grace to her feet. "May I?" he asked softly, his free hand rising to gently touch her cheek. She nodded, and he bent to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was tender yet charged with the feelings they had both been restraining. Grace's hands moved to his shoulders as she responded, all her doubts and fears temporarily silenced by the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally parted, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "We should proceed carefully. There's much to consider." "Yes," she agreed, though part of her wanted nothing more than to throw caution aside completely. "My land, Emma's education, the ranch. All important matters." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But we have time to address them properly. For now, know that whatever you decide about your future, I want to be part of it if you'll have me." "I think I'd like that very much," Grace whispered, and leaned up to kiss him again beneath the vast canopy of stars. The next morning, Grace woke to a tap at her door. Emma entered, still in her nightgown, her expression a mixture of excitement and conspiracy. "I saw you and Colt on the porch last night," she announced without preamble, sitting on the edge of Grace's bed. Grace felt her cheeks flush. "Emma, it's not polite to spy on people." "I wasn't spying. I was getting water from the kitchen and happened to look out the window." She grinned. "You were kissing." "Emma, I'm glad," the girl continued earnestly. "Colt needs someone like you, and I need someone to talk to about things he doesn't understand." Despite her embarrassment, Grace had to smile at Emma's practical assessment. "Your brother and I are exploring possibilities." "Nothing is decided yet. But you do like him," Emma pressed. "Yes, very much. And you like the ranch and teaching me?" "Yes to both." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Then it's settled. You'll stay and marry Colt and be my sister instead of just my tutor." "It's not quite that simple," Grace protested, though the image Emma painted was admittedly appealing. "Adults always complicate things," Emma sighed, standing up. "Just don't take too long deciding. Colt's been alone too many years already." With that piece of wisdom delivered, she left as abruptly as she had arrived, leaving Grace to ponder the insightful observation from someone so young. Over breakfast, Grace found it difficult to meet Colton's eyes, aware of Emma watching them both with barely contained glee. Her uncle seemed to sense the changed atmosphere as well, raising an eyebrow at Grace when Colton's hand lingered near hers while passing the coffee. Judge Parker and Mr. Wilson, oblivious to the personal undercurrents, focused the conversation on legal matters. "We'll depart for Denver tomorrow," the judge announced. "Miss Reynolds, your presence will be required for testimony in approximately 2 weeks. Mr. Jameson has generously offered to accompany you." "Of course," Grace agreed, catching Colton's small smile across the table. Later, as the men gathered in the study to finalize paperwork, her uncle pulled her aside in the parlor. "Your Mr. Jameson is an impressive man," he observed. "Not many would go to such lengths for an employee." "He's a good man," Grace agreed, trying to sound neutral. Her uncle wasn't fooled. "And more than an employer to you now, I think." She considered denying it but found she didn't want to. "It's recent and unexpected. The best things often are." He patted her hand. "Your father would approve, you know. He always admired people who forged their own paths." "What about my land?" Grace asked. "If we win the case against Blackwell, I'll have the property father wanted me to have. Land is valuable, certainly, but it's what you build on it that matters." He studied her face. "What do you want, Grace? Not what your father wanted for you or what you think you should want. What does your heart tell you?" It was a question she had been avoiding since Colton's confession the night before. Her father's land represented security and independence, things she had desperately needed when she arrived in Colorado. But now, with her uncle's support and the prospect of defeating Blackwell's claim, those weren't her only options for securing her future, and the ranch had become more than just a temporary sanctuary. It had become a place where she felt useful, respected, and increasingly loved. "I want to be where I can do the most good," she said finally, "and where I can be happy." Her uncle smiled. Then I think you already know your answer. The next morning, Judge Parker, Mr. Wilson, and her uncle departed for Denver, with plans for Grace and Colton to join them in 2 weeks for the hearing. As the riders disappeared down the long road from the ranch, Emma turned to Grace. "Can we skip lessons today? I want to show you something." Colton, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow. "Your education doesn't pause because we have legal matters to attend to, Emma." "Please, Colt, it's important." She gave him a meaningful look that Grace couldn't interpret. After a moment, he nodded. "Be back by dinner." Emma led Grace to the stables, where 2 horses were already saddled. "We're riding to the North Ridge. It's my favorite place on the whole ranch." The autumn day was perfect for riding, cool but sunny, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily until they reached a ridge overlooking the entire valley. From this vantage point, Grace could see the full extent of the Jameson Ranch, stretching for miles in every direction. "It's breathtaking," she said honestly. Emma nodded, dismounting near a large boulder. "Colt brings me here on my birthday every year. He says it helps us remember what's important." Grace joined her on the boulder, understanding why the spot held special meaning. "And what does he say is important?" "Family. Home. Building something that lasts." Emma plucked a wildflower growing between rocks. "He brought Alice here once, before she died. He told me he was going to ask her to marry him on this spot, but she got sick before he could." The revelation made Grace's heart ache for the man Colton had been 5 years ago, young in love, planning a future that was brutally taken from him. "He was different after that," Emma continued. "Focused only on the ranch and me, until you came." She turned to Grace, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "I brought you here because I want you to understand what this place means to us. It's not just land and cattle. It's everything our family has built for generations." "I understand," Grace said softly. "You love him." Emma asked bluntly. The question caught Grace off guard. "Emma, just answer. Do you love my brother?" Grace looked out over the valley, considering how to respond to such a direct question. The truth was, she had been avoiding putting a name to her feelings, fearful of their intensity after such a short acquaintance. But here, overlooking the legacy Colton had dedicated his life to preserving, the answer seemed suddenly clear. "Yes," she said simply. "I believe I do." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good, because he loves you too. He won't say it yet because he's cautious and thinks he needs to give you time. But I know my brother." Grace had to smile at the girl's confidence. "When did you become so wise about matters of the heart?" "I read a lot of novels when the tutors weren't looking," Emma admitted with a grin. "And I've watched Colt all my life. He's happier since you came. He laughs more." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching clouds cast shadows across the landscape below. Finally, Emma stood. "We should head back. I've shown you what I wanted you to see." As they mounted their horses, Grace took one last look at the panoramic view. In that moment, she could picture herself returning to this spot through the years, watching the seasons change across the valley, building a life with Colton and Emma in this wild, beautiful place that had begun to feel like home. 2 weeks later, Grace found herself in Denver, seated beside Colton in the territorial courthouse. The hearing regarding her father's land had drawn unexpected attention, with the courtroom filled to capacity. News of Blackwell Mining Company's fraudulent practices had spread throughout the territory, and many who had lost land to the company had come to witness the proceedings. Judge Parker presided with stern efficiency, allowing Mr. Wilson to present evidence of Blackwell's systematic falsification of land records. When Grace was called to testify about her father's purchase and her own experiences upon arriving in Redemption Creek, She spoke clearly and confidently, aware of Colton's supportive presence in the gallery. By mid-afternoon, the judge had heard enough. He ruled decisively in Grace's favor, ordering the immediate restoration of her property rights and initiating a broader investigation into Blackwell's activities throughout the territory. As people filed out of the courtroom, many stopped to congratulate Grace and thank her for standing against the powerful company. Her uncle embraced her warmly. "Your father would be proud," he said. "You've not only secured your inheritance, but helped countless others who lacked the resources to fight." "I couldn't have done it without Colton," she replied, glancing at the rancher who stood nearby speaking with Judge Parker. "Have you decided what you'll do now?" her uncle asked. Before she could answer, Colton approached, his expression serious despite their victory. "Congratulations, Grace. The land is rightfully yours again." "Thanks to you," she reminded him. He shook his head. "I only helped reveal the truth. Your courage made this possible." Her uncle cleared his throat. "I believe I'll go congratulate Mr. Wilson. Remarkable job he did presenting the evidence." With a knowing smile, he walked away, leaving Grace and Colton alone in the rapidly emptying courtroom. "Your land is quite valuable," Colton said after a moment. "The silver vein they discovered runs right through it. You could sell it for a substantial sum." "I could," she agreed, "or I could keep it as an investment for the future." "What future do you envision, Grace?" His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes revealed the importance of her answer. She took a deep breath. "One where I continue teaching Emma, at least until she's ready for school back east. One where I perhaps use my medical knowledge to help people in the territory who lack proper care." "And where would you do these things from?" he asked, moving closer. "I was thinking the Jameson Ranch might be a suitable location." She looked up at him, her heart racing. If the owner had no objections. A slow smile spread across his face. "The owner has no objections whatsoever. In fact," he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "The owner was hoping you might consider a more permanent arrangement." Grace's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon by Eastern standards. But out here, we learn quickly what matters. And you, Grace Reynolds, matter to me more than anything except Emma." Tears blurred Grace's vision as he continued. "I love you. I didn't expect to love anyone again after Alice, but you've awakened something in me I thought was gone forever. Will you marry me? Be Emma's sister in truth as well as affection. Make the ranch your home, not just a place you work." "Yes," she whispered, unable to contain her joy. "Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace, heedless of the few remaining people in the courtroom. When their lips met, Grace felt as though every challenge she had faced since coming west, every hardship, every fear, every moment of doubt had been leading her to this moment and this man. They were married 3 weeks later in the parlor of the Jameson Ranch, with Emma serving as Grace's maid of honor and her uncle giving her away. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, and Mrs. Abernathy prepared a feast that the entire ranch celebrated well into the night. As the evening drew to a close, Colton led his new wife out onto the porch, away from the continuing festivities inside. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "More than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, resting her head against his chest. "When I took that cleaning job at the Saloon, I never dreamed the Cowboy at table 5 would change my life so completely." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "And I never imagined finding my future while playing cards in Redemption Creek." They stood together, looking out over the ranch that was now truly their shared home. In the distance, A coyote called, answered by another farther away, wild sounds that had once seemed alien to Grace, but now formed part of the backdrop of her life. "What will you do about your father's land?" Colton asked after a comfortable silence. "Uncle George is helping me lease part of it to a reputable mining company, one that treats workers fairly and uses modern safety practices. The income will fund a small clinic here at the ranch, where I can use my medical training to help neighboring families who can't reach a doctor in town." Pride shone in Colton's eyes. "You're quite remarkable, Mrs. Jameson." "As are you, Mr. Jameson." She smiled up at him. "Emma says we're both stubborn enough to prosper out here." "Emma is usually right," he acknowledged with a laugh. "Speaking of which, she's already planning to teach our future children to ride before they can walk." "Children?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "She seems very confident about our future." "She has good instincts about these things." He bent to kiss her softly. "And I find myself hoping she's right." Grace's arms tightened around him. "I think she is." As they sealed this agreement with another kiss, Grace marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman scrubbing floors in a frontier saloon to the beloved wife of Colton Jameson, respected rancher and the finest man she had ever known. The West had tested her in ways she never anticipated, but it had also offered rewards beyond her wildest dreams: a family, a purpose, and a love as vast and promising as the territory itself. And as Colton led her back inside to their waiting guests and the celebration of their new beginning, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not just a way out of her troubles, but a way forward into a future bright with possibility. 5 years later, Grace stood on the North Ridge, watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson. Beside her, Colton held their 3-year-old son, Elijah, who pointed excitedly at the cattle visible in the distance. "Cows, Papa, our cows." "That's right, son," Colton confirmed, his voice filled with the pride of a father and a rancher. "One day all this will be yours to care for. And Emma's too." The boy asked, referring to his beloved aunt who now attended a prestigious women's college in Boston, fulfilling the dream Colton had long held for her. "Emma has other plans," Grace explained gently, "but she'll always be part of our family and the ranch." She rested a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the movement of their second child, a daughter. She was certain due to arrive before winter. The small clinic she had established at the ranch had grown into a respected medical facility serving the entire county, with Grace gaining recognition for her treatment of childhood diseases and difficult births. Colton set Elijah down to explore nearby wildflowers under their watchful eyes, then wrapped an arm around Grace's shoulders. "Regrets?" he asked softly, a question he still posed occasionally, as if needing reassurance that she was truly content with the life they had built. "Not one," she answered truthfully, leaning into his embrace. "Every difficulty led me here, to you and our family. How could I regret any of it?" He smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening lines she loved because they had formed largely from happiness in the years they had been together. "I thank God every day for whatever twist of fate led you to take that job at the Gilded Horseshoe," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I thank God for the cowboy at table 5, she replied, turning in his arms to kiss him properly as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land that was their legacy and their home.